I have to start by saying every time I'm with entrepreneurs and you've got so much energy and you're talking about innovation in the future, I feel like marrying women and corporate governance, that I'm just bringing the mood down. People are like, oh, yeah, we do need more women on boards. Yeah. I want to talk about, first of all, who here is on a board, any board. It could be a nonprofit board. So I think you understand the value of being on boards for your business as well as for the organizations you serve on. We're going to be talking here, I think, about not just the business case, but also the real who, what, when, where, and why, I think, as Susan put it, the journalistic, how you do it, and how do we get, more importantly, companies to do it. Let me start with Andrea, and you've been on both sides, both as a CEO on boards. We're here at Entrepreneurship Day. Why should we care about this, getting women on boards?
Well, without repeating, which the case for women on boards, which I think has been well made, not just in theory but in actual pragmatic numbers. I think all of us understand that the role of women on boards, whether it's nonprofits, for-profits, is important. The actual pragmatic reality of how to get that done is a really, I think, continuing A, challenge, and B, dialogue. I just have to say, I mean, I was one of the early women CEOs in the Fortune 500, so of course board seats were big opportunities for the couple of us. There was, I think, myself, Carly Fiorina, and Meg Whitman. I think that was about it in 1999. And
one of those three has not run for office yet.
One of those three is, this is the closest I'm getting.
We're in the UN. So
and we're in the UN. But I will just say that it's, I'm going to say it here. I mean, it's startling to me. That was 1999. This is 2015, and the numbers are not that much better. It's pretty daunting to me because kind of the challenges that I felt early on as a female CEO, and I look today, and I see that the dialogue hasn't changed that much, particularly here in the United States. It's just unbelievable to me. It's just unacceptable. And we had a little dialogue before we came up here. I sit on 3 boards today. 2 of them are U.S. boards, Apple and GE. Opposite coasts, very, very different. Both obviously faced with obviously making sure that every single person on the board is enormously qualified given the size, the stature, and the issues facing these 3 companies, but also facing the issue of gender diversity, diversity in general. Silicon Valley certainly having been under attack and continuing to be under attack in terms of female representation. But I just do want to say that sitting on a European board, I would have been someone who really was not about quotas, that I would have thought we could have gotten there more easily in the United States without that. And having gone on to a German board, I'm on the Mercedes-Daimler board, and joined before the legislation. And obviously there was talk about legislation in the 30% in Europe. But I just would say pragmatically watching not just women on boards, but the women in that management team in a all-male, heavily male-oriented car industry skyrocket to hit those numbers, not just to hit the numbers, but with great qualified women engineers on all fronts. I would just say it probably accelerated progress by a decade as far as I'm concerned. So having kind of come into it thinking that we could get there with the carrot as opposed to the stick, I personally think we have to think hard with no progress, and I can personally attest to it over 15 years, that there might need to be a heavier requirement and a way to get this done in the United States because the numbers are unacceptable.
So where is the U.S. relative to other countries? We know Germany's ahead. How are we doing against the rest of the world in terms of getting women on boards and some of the processes through which some of the women here can also get on boards?
Quotas, or even the threat of quotas, work. Let's take an example in France a few years ago when the lower house passed the quotas. Only 8% of the directors in France were women. That year, the men all rushed out to sort of try to get the very best women to go onto their boards. Even before the Senate passed legislation, the numbers doubled 1 year, 16%. One fun story, Publicis, one of the world's largest advertising agencies, brought 5 women on at once. They took a look at this global firm and said, "There's no strategic planning committee." And the CEO said, "Well, then, if you want one, you start one." So the women started the strategic planning committee. They head it and they run it. So women right away can get involved. So wherever you have quotas or targets, various parts of the world, or where you have SECs that mandate that companies have to say what they're doing about diversity, then you have a lot more change than in the U.S. In the U.S., the bigger companies change faster than the smaller companies. The public companies change faster than the private companies. And for your first boards, you should be looking at private companies, family companies, mid-cap size companies. There's a great chance to sort of prove yourself and then move yourself up.
Vanessa, talk a little bit as general counsel. Obviously, we don't have quotas here, but give us some perspective of what the role of a general counsel is in looking at this. And you're also in the banking industry, which is also not, I think, been a place where we've seen a dominance of women on boards. Is that fair to say?
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah. Hi. Hi. Welcome.
Yeah. A couple of things. I'll speak to what you asked me, and I just want to pick up on Andrea's point as well. As you know, I'm from Bank of the West. As you well know, we're owned by BNP Paribas. So I would say that notwithstanding the French quotas, that BNP Paribas certainly always had a commitment to women in the workforce. I mean, you got to.
Aren't they one of the sponsors here?
They're one of the sponsors here,
yes,
Bank of the West. And think about it. If you look at the dynamics and the statistics of the workforce coming up, it's women. If you don't have really brilliant women helping you manage your companies and on boards, you're just not going to be successful. So BNP Paribas, actually, of its 12 elected directors, already has 5 that are women, and they have 2 employee voted directors who are also women. At Bank of the West, we only have 2, but you see Claudia from the prior panel. She's as good as 3 or 4, I would say. We are working our way, but if you look at the banking industry overall, Diane, we're measuring just about what the rest of the Fortune 500, those companies are, about 20%. There are some, Wells Fargo's about 40%, but then there are some that only have like 1 woman. So I am like Andrea in that at first I did not believe in quotas. I've always felt that we all know, we've all been in women's movements and we've all supported women's groups. Right now in a male-dominated industry, we have to have men's support to succeed. So I was always concerned that if you tried to impose a quota, it would just be a great backlash, and the men would not appreciate it, and then they would not help us. But when you look at Europe, when you look at those countries, and as Andrea said, when you look at the change that can be made, and honest, the first panel I think this morning and the second one, someone from Guatemala was talking about a program that they have for politicians, and they can't find women to be in the program. How many times have we heard this? I would hire them. I would put them on the board if only I could find them. Here we are, okay?
Right.
So
binders full of women.
So all we need is a push. All we need is a leg up, right? Did I answer your question?
Well, you answered enough to feel like you know.
That contributed?
You'll continue. Cynthia, give us your perspective on this, where it ranks as a priority. You're in a lot of, C-suite clients talking to them. Is this up there, 1 or 2? Must get women on board. How can I do it? Help?
It should be more of a priority. In my career, I started as a partner at Deloitte in consulting and left early as a partner. And I was the first woman on the Office Depot board. I've been on 10 public company boards, frequently the first woman on the board. And the last company where I was the first woman on the board was 9 years ago. And that should not have been. And there are still companies that don't have women on the boards. And I agree with Andrea that we have tried the carrot, and it's now time for the stick. That's not to say that it should be quotas. But the threat of quotas worked in the UK, and I'm more a fan of the fame and shame game. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Fame, when that fabulous woman at lunch from Intuit was speaking, I looked up to see if there were women board members on the Intuit board, and there are. Now let me give you a shame example. And I'm going to point out the press. The press recently has been all over this woman CEO's public company, Theranos, for not having doctors on the board. Not one word about no female outside directors. Not one word. There aren't any female doctors that are capable of sitting on a blood testing board. So I think that, you've got to shame them in addition to congratulating the ones who do. And it's not just enough to congratulate them.
Well, go ahead, but I think when you talk about the case of talking about women doctors, it does raise, I think, the issue of diversity comes in many forms, and so when you want a board member, you want them with marketing experience overseas, and maybe medical experience, and it'd be great if she was a woman, and it's just one factor. Should it be the most important factor?
I think you have to look at putting a portfolio of voices together. And I agree with you, Diane. It's all about diversity. And, oh, by the way, as an entrepreneur, if you have an all-female advisory board, there's something wrong with that, too. Because an all-one-gender board does nothing, generally, but be an echo chamber for the CEO. And that's not appropriate. Really fine CEO leaders want to be challenged, and they're not afraid to have diverse opinions at the table. And if you look at companies, especially public companies, that have diverse boards, and you guys ought to care about this, they generally are more supportive of women in the C-suite, but they also have, and this is the part you need to care about, they have good minority purchasing programs so that their vendor purchasing looks for women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses. And by the way, if I can take another 30 seconds, I want to make an announcement today because I sit on both public and private boards. And I think that sitting on private boards is just as important. And one of my companies where I'm lead director just announced their launch today, and it is Founders First Capital Partners, that is focused on revenue-based lending to women, minority, and veterans companies. And it's the only one in the space to try and get access to capital for women-owned companies.
Right. And maybe we'll get a discount code or something. No, I'm kidding. Just for, you want to add something, Vanessa? Yeah.
Well, I think there are a lot of studies that show while women care about numbers and internal controls as well, they also care about corporate social responsibility. They care about the softer issues, and there's a different dynamic that's on the board. But to your point about, what do you look at? You're always looking at, and I'll make this disclaimer now that these experiences are at more than one company, excluding the one that I am now. But what I will say is that you look at skills and experience, and whether or not the candidate's female is one thing, but the other thing you got to think about on these boards is you're trying to build an effective board. And an effective board is a board that can deal with difficult issues in a collegial manner. And because of that, a lot of the directors are people that people know, right? They feel comfortable with so-and-so. When we recruited Claudia, we actually went to a search firm and we said, we're looking for new directors. But I think probably, Susan, I think you had the statistic, only 20% of the public seats that come available actually go out publicly.
I want to turn to Andrea because when we're talking about board searches, I think that we do sometimes, we imagine what the perfect board member is like, but talk about what you found, and Susan, you weigh in too, of whether it's GE, Apple, give us some stories. You can anonymize them, of course, but of what exactly goes into the decision making. Do you sort of take the guidance of a search firm, or are they people that you know and trust for the most part?
Well, let me just, I'll answer that two ways. I'll just talk a little bit about, because I'm on actually the nominating committee. So that is the committee that selects board members for both those companies, and then I'll just give you my own personal stories if I even go back. It's a while ago and they're a little bit different. But just you asked the question, I think the rigor, the devil's always in the details. So yes, experience matters, and like any other large organization, there are a grid of requirements, whether, what are the gaps, where are we strong, where do we need a financial expert, where do we need technology, where do we need global. I mean, these are not things that would be different than any other company, but I think the detail comes into making sure that there is a diverse set of candidates for each one of those. So if we said we need someone to represent, digital technology at GE, or the global, or Latin America, whatever it may be, that comes in a matrix, not instead of or ahead of, but at the same time making sure that, so in that requirement, do we have a diverse set of candidates? And that's a really important, actually, how we do it. And I think that's important. And my personal stories, I mean, I'm on 3 boards, and so I guess this would marry what Susan said. One of the boards was through a headhunter. The other 2 were not. So I would be right in there in your statistic of 2 of the 3 boards that I'm on, what was not through, sort of a traditional headhunting approach. But my story that you'll smile at is that I actually met Steve Jobs in the elevator in the Park Hyatt Hotel in Tokyo, a decade before he passed. And we were talking, and he said, look, I know you're, and this, I was not a CEO. I wasn't even a COO at that time yet. I was in marketing and branding, and he knew that, and he was interested in understanding how to kind of market, brand, and think about New York City and maybe a store that we're going to do underground, kind of near the GM building. And so he said to me, like, we got off the elevator in the lobby, and he said to me, I'm going to call you the next time I'm in New York. And I thought, okay, fine. And I thought, sure. And we worked over at 55th and 6th Avenue, and lo and behold, 2 weeks later, the security guard at the Capital Alliance desk called up and said, I think Steve Jobs is in the lobby, and he's wearing a black turtleneck, so I think it's him. So I'm like, okay. So he came up, and we took a walk over to this, what wasn't yet the Apple store, and it was just one of those experiences. And 4 years later, I joined the board. So because we just got to know each other, and as it related to marketing and retail experience, New York City. So a very untraditional way, by the way, of joining.
And I want to talk, Susan, I want to look at the thinking behind who gets on a board, because we always think, well, you have to have a certain set of accomplishments. But I remember when Chelsea Clinton got on, I think it was the IAC board, and everybody was so outraged that she was 30, and like, what has she done other than have the name Clinton? And the reality is that most boards, I think you could make the argument are too old versus too young. If you're trying to use your board strategically, you want to be like Howard Schultz. You want to have people who are young entrepreneurs, people who are innovators, because they're the ones who can help you see around the corners. Is that, in fact, what people are coming to you for? Are they starting to think that way, or do they really want, I want a CEO, or I want somebody, a former CEO, because they'll understand what it's like?
Understand the importance of multi-gender, multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multinational, multi-regional. Cynthia Cohen has put onto the boards when she's been on retail companies young women who understand digital social media. But getting back to what Andrea said a minute ago, life is one big interview. And you need to be thinking about that as you prepare your careers and prepare for jobs. Let me give you a couple examples. A couple of years ago, back when the CEOs had more power on getting on the boards, and they still do at family businesses and smaller companies, one of our members went to the interview. Now, an interview for board is not across a desk. You're supposed to be equal, so it's usually at a country club or at a city club. She walks in. This is a wine and tobacco company. And the CEO says, I guess you're going to have the usual girly white wine. She says, no, as a matter of fact, I'm not. I'm going to have scotch. She says, scotch? I drink scotch. Well, what kind? She said, Dewar's. We said, I drink Dewar's. Well, I guess you never tried our chewing tobacco. She said, yes, I have. Let me tell you what I thought about it. He said, that's it. First qualified woman I found. Now, for 2 years, he'd been looking at resumes. Okay. But the people came in and hadn't done their homework. And so it's so important to be able not just have your board resume, which is important, we talk about it in a minute, but also to be able to click in those interviews. Another example, many of you are nonprofit boards.
It reminds me of that Cosmo article where they say, put your hand on his knee and ask him about, whatever. It feels a little, I think it was creative for her to drink Dewar's.
Search firm was asked to put in at least one diversity candidate for one of the largest private companies in America. They said, you're just going to go in for a practice round. One of the guys are going to get this. She did her homework. It turned out the CEO of the company she's interviewing with played ice hockey. She was on the first ice hockey team at Princeton. The first 20 minutes was talking about ice hockey. They broke, the ice, and she went on to go onto that board. But nonprofit boards, it's very important for all of you to not do as many nonprofit boards as possible, but do a few and do them well. Because then you're going to have people around the room who are going to be able to say, I can sponsor you into a bigger board because I've seen you in action. Take an example. Connie Duckworth a few years ago, we had a great career at Goldman. She was on a troubled hospital board. She merged with a better hospital board. It took a couple of years. It was tough duty. Out of that, 2 CEOs, Northwestern Mutual and Steelcase. Those CEOs sat on that board. They watched her on the nonprofit board. She's on both boards now. So it's getting out there. It's doing your homework. It's being seen as a professional who can do the job.
One of the things I'm curious about, we all know about perhaps the value of being on a board, but I want to ask 2 questions. One is what the value of the board can be for you, and I'm going to start with you, Cynthia, and anybody can weigh in. When you're thinking about creating a board for your company, maybe with an eye to going public or staying private, how do you create a strategic board for yourself other than hiring a search firm? And how do you think people tend to think about creating that board versus how they should think about it?
I think it's a great question because I counsel a lot of entrepreneurs on how to set up advisory boards, which frequently is a precursor to a fiduciary board. And you have to look at it as a portfolio of skills, just like a portfolio of investments. You don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. So you don't want all financial people, you don't want all operating people, and you don't want all people that are in their 20s or 30s. You want diversity. And so you look at what are the functional skills that you ought to have sitting around the table. Do you have ethnic diversity, gender diversity represented? And do you have experience diversity represented there? Entrepreneurs are great to sit next to a very sage business person that has 30 years of experience. That's how you get a great conversation at the table. You should have a table of type A people. They should each be fighting with each other to kind of say, give me some airtime. But they should be collegial. And so it's the famous question is this a person that you want to have dinner with? Do you want, because you know what? You are going to spend, whether you're the CEO, the chairman of the board, or a board member, you are going to spend upwards of 8 to 10 hours sitting in a room where the air gets staler and staler on the most uncomfortable chairs together. So you better like the people and trust their judgment. Yes.
And I think we talked a little bit, since I'm, I guess, the press here, the reputational risk. I want to talk a little bit about whether that even factors in from thinking about the diversity of your board, because oftentimes there's a little bit of a Monday morning quarterback, like, oh, did we not have a woman on our board? Oh, in just a second, we just found one, after it gets into the news perhaps, or it's a dysfunctional board. I mean, governance can be the gift that keeps on giving sometimes with certain companies, but I have to say it isn't top of mind at first. So as a general counsel, I want to just ask you, and again, I don't want to keep overplaying your role, but is that something that you think of from a reputational point of view? Because in the U.S., for example, you have a lot of state treasurers now that certainly look at boards in terms of their investments for pension funds. I think it's a factor that people look at. It might not be the same number of people as Andrea was talking about, but it is coming up as an issue.
Comment as well. For some reason, investors in the U.S., I just haven't been seeing them push for gender diversity as much. I personally, I have like a few little shares of stock, and I always write on my proxy card for those people that don't have a lot of women, when are you going to nominate more women? And I don't vote for the men, so I don't know if anybody reads my comments, but
post them on for like write articles.
That's right. But I think it depends upon your industry. So, for example, if you're, and I think probably the statistics hold true, that if you're a consumer company, and if you look at the women who are the consumers and who have the purse strings, if you don't have women on the board, then that could be an issue. Maybe some other more old line companies, it's not as much of an issue, and I think that goes to the same thing with the millennials or the Gen Xers, right? It's a technology company, it depends on, but the truth of the matter is, we have to go into the next century here, right? And everybody needs innovation. So to your point about the entrepreneurs, you know, one of the things banking's trying to do is be innovative. All the industries are trying to be innovative. To be innovative, you have to have diverse thinking, right? And you have to have people on your board who are different. But I go back to collegiality. That has to be one of the most important things for a board, and you can see it's winding through all of our comments, whether it be who you want to go to dinner to.
I mean, I think, I'm not even sure if was that the 5-minute warning, like the equivalent of, I heard a ding, so I'm not sure how much time we have left, if we should be summing up soon, but collegiality is a hard thing when you don't know the people that you're necessarily getting on the board of. So but I do think it perhaps comes through in some of the other work that people do. So I want to ask each of you, in anticipation of wrapping up, a little bit about some tips, some advice that you have for people in the audience, not just to get on boards, but people who are in leadership roles here, people who perhaps are thinking about it from an investment point of view as to how not only can they move the needle on it, but how they should think about this personally. And I'm going to start, actually, Cynthia, with you and work our way down. Any thoughts?
Yes, specifically for the entrepreneurs, when you present yourself to any board, public or private, one of the things you have to remember is you are what I call double-dipping consumers. And for instance, all the technology vendors know this, the banking vendors know this. Women still make the majority of brand decisions for the household. When you're an entrepreneur, you not only make the majority of the brand decisions for your household, you're making the brand decisions for your business. And so IBM clearly knows that. Verizon clearly knows that. That's one of the ways that you need to market yourself. As you were saying, when they look for women to sit on their board, you are representing that small business community that is making decisions about brands. You also can help the company on entrepreneurship. Big companies struggle so much to start small new businesses within their big bureaucratic organization. And that's another way to market yourself, to say you really know how to do that, how to coalesce a team, to run through walls and do it faster, how to really get innovation done quicker than some of the big companies do. And that's your other reason to be there, in addition to functional and industry expertise.
Great. So Vanessa,
so the collegiality, I would say it's two ways, okay? They're interviewing you and talking to you to see if you're a fit, but you're also talking to them to see if they're a fit. Because almost everybody, I think, would tell you that before you pick a board or you join a board, you need to make sure that you like the people. So don't look at this like this is a job interview. And collegiality is there or it's not. Sure, if you're a jerk, you're probably not going to be a good board member, right? If you won't let people talk their turn, you're probably not going to be a good board member. But once it goes beyond that, it's, that level of trust, if you do feel at ease with a person, and that's why we've got the problem that men keep nominating men. And that's why we've got to get a bigger field of women so that we can start influencing and supporting women as well.
Susan, you have a lot of different ways people can, at the very least, also get themselves ready, board ready, because that's something that
we do these onboard boot camps all over the world, and obviously there are day-long programs that have to be sort of brief here. But one of the first things to do is anyone, whether it's a search firm or an individual looking at you for a board, is going to Google you. Google yourself. Are you a leader in your industry? Are the Google servers showing that you're speaking? Are you writing out? If not, start writing, start speaking, start getting known. You want to sort of build your experience on committees, whether it's compensation or audit or finance. So get on a nonprofit board. Don't go for lots of nonprofit boards. Find some one or two big nonprofit boards where there are the kind of people you want to get to know, so they can recommend you for their boards. Become a committee chair. So show that you've got the expertise. And then you've got a network. So many of the board opportunities really do come from people saying, who do you know? We need someone right now. And boards they're very specific specs. They'll say we need someone for the comp committee who has global branding or financial expertise or emerging markets. Emerging markets now, 33% of the people who went on boards last year went on boards because they had emerging markets experience. That's key. Financial expertise is key. Almost half of the women last year went on boards, went on audit committees. Why? Men don't want to do it anymore. It's boring. It takes time, not extra pay. So if you've got that financial expertise, it's liability, but it's something to serve build. So you want to build your networks, your Google, your experience as a leader in your industry, and your resume. A board resume is different than a normal resume. Right at the top, there's a paragraph saying, here are the boards I've served on. If they're only nonprofit boards, you put the nonprofit boards. Here are the committees. So people can see right away. The average search firm spends less than 30 seconds on a resume when it comes through. You've got to have it stand out right away and be able to put that resume together and then the whole package together about being able to go out, do your homework, and network.
Andrea.
I would just echo everything that's been said and just go deeper on the thought that do fewer or one or two and do them deep. If anyone asks how much time does it take, usually that's the first negative sign because they always take longer. So my own opinion would be if someone's just kind of trying to check a box and see how many meetings, really effective board members end up, particularly if you're only one of two women on that board, I mean, the kinds of things you can do extracurricularly, if you would, beyond just what's required to help the agenda, the culture, is where you're going to make the invaluable contribution. I can just tell you the search firm only goes so far. When we get close to a candidate, you know, the more you can be active in a board, we're going to call the other board members, not just the CEO. The board members on the nominating committee, not the search firm, are going to call people they know that you sit on that board with. And that's going to be really where the true test of, is this person going to fit with us? They may be great on the end. And what is he or she doing in addition to showing up at the regular committees that really makes them stand out. And so if you can do that, I don't think you can do it with 4 or 5. Just do it with a couple and do deep and really contribute.
Right. And my only advice is it matters. I think that I've discovered more as a journalist that it really does matter who's on your board, and it really does matter how well a company does. So take it seriously when you're building your own board, and I hope you all make an effort to get on one. So thanks very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.